Artyom had been looking for his dream home for a long time. When a realtor offered him an old but spacious mansion outside the city at a surprisingly low price, he couldn't believe his luck. The house was in good condition, although it looked a little neglected. High ceilings, spiral staircase, massive wooden doors. Everything looked perfect, except for one detail: the locals avoided this house. Hadn't anyone lived here for a long time? Artyom asked the realtor, signing the documents. Many years, he answered, averting his gaze. Just rumors. Nonsense. Artyom did not ask further. He did not believe in mysticism. But already on the first night he felt that there was something wrong in this house. Unpacking boxes in the living room, Artyom heard a sound. It was as if someone was moving slowly on the upper floor. He went upstairs, but found no one. The house was empty. It's just a draft, he muttered to himself, but something inside told him it wasn't. In the night he woke to a knocking sound. Quiet, measured. Knock, knock, knock. The sound came from the wall at the headboard of the bed. Artyom sharply turned on the light and listened. Silence. It seemed. He tried to convince himself, but soon he realized that he was wrong. The next day, when he was dismantling the storeroom, he came across an old wooden hatch in the floor. Curiosity got the better of him and he opened it. There was a smell of dampness and decay. Climbing down with a flashlight, Artyom found a narrow corridor under the house, leading to a cellar, which had not been mentioned in the house plan. In the depths of the cellar, he saw something strange: a wooden chest, locked with a massive rusty lock. A shovel was lying nearby, and the floor was covered with earth, as if someone had recently tried to hide something, or dig it up. Artyom bent down to get a better look at the chest, but suddenly he heard a suppressed whisper behind him. You've come to the wrong house. He turned around sharply, but there was no one behind him. The flashlight in his hands flickered. A chill ran down his spine, and then he heard it: a muffled, wet sound, like something heavy moving under the ground. Artyom froze in place, listening to the muffled sounds coming from underground. It could have been a rodent, old pipes, anything, but it was as if his body knew the truth before his mind did. He wiped his sweaty palms and tried to open the chest, but the lock wouldn't budge, so he grabbed the shovel and hit it with all his might. The lock cracked loudly and fell to the ground. He hesitated for a second, then slowly opened the lid. Inside were bones, not animal bones, but human bones. Skull, sternum, ribs. Someone had once buried an entire body here. But the worst thing was that next to the bones lay a yellow diary. Artyom turned the first page with difficulty. I didn't want to do it. They made me do it. This house, it demands sacrifices of its own. A rumble. Loud, distinct, as if someone had slammed the door of the house with force. Artyom dropped the diary and froze, not believing his ears. Was he alone, or not? A sound came from the ground again. This time it was a quiet crunch. It was as if someone had moved. Panic seized him, and he rushed up the stairs. As he slammed the hatch shut behind him, he had the eerie feeling that someone or something was now aware of his presence. That night, Artyom couldn't sleep. He lay in bed, listening to every rustle. And then the knocking started again. Knock, knock, knock. First from the wall, then from the floor, and then from under the bed. He turned his head slowly. Two pale, dead eyes stared at him from the darkness under the bed. Artyom held his breath. The two pale eyes didn't blink, didn't move, just stared at him from under the bed. He wanted to jump up, run, scream, but his body refused to obey. The eyes slowly began to approach. A hand crawled out of the darkness. Bony, with black, broken nails, it reached for his leg. Artyom rolled sharply from the bed and grabbed the lamp, trying to illuminate the floor. But there was no one under the bed. Just a dark, frightening emptiness. The next morning, Artyom made a decision to leave this house. But when he went to the door to leave, it didn't open. Shit, he yanked the knob harder. The lock wouldn't budge. He tried the windows. It was locked. Even the basement where he'd found the bones yesterday was locked up tight. The house didn't want to let him out. Then there was a whisper in the hallway. You can't leave. The walls of the house seemed to groan. The wood crackled, and black shadows crept across the floor. Something eerie and ancient had awakened. Artyom ran to the bedroom, slammed the door and leaned against it, trying to catch his breath. But someone was already in the room. A silhouette slowly crawled out from under the bed. Its head was twisted at an unnatural angle. Its skin was charred and covered in deep wounds. And then a second creature emerged from the closet. Artyom stepped back in horror. "We were here before you," the first one wheezed. "You built a house on our bones, and now you're with us." And at that moment, hundreds of hands reached for him from under the floor. Hands, dark and mutilated, grabbed Artyom's legs. They pulled him down into the cold, rotting floor. "You are the victim," howled a voice from the darkness. Artyom became hysterical, twitching his legs, trying to break free. He grabbed the lamp from the table and struck the nearest hand with force. It crumbled into black dust, but the others continued to grab him. Then he remembered the diary he had found in the basement. It said, "The house demands blood, but there is a way to close the gates." Artyom rushed to the nightstand where he had left the diary. The pages began to turn themselves, as if something invisible was leading him. On the last page, a new sentence appeared, written in someone else's blood. "Fire will cleanse sins. Sacrifice will set you free." "Sacrifice," whispered Artyom. The house roared. The walls began to bleed. He realized that if he didn't perform the ritual, he himself would become the next victim. Artyom ran out into the living room, grabbed the gasoline that was left over from the renovation, and started dousing the walls. "If you want blood, get it, you bastards." With shaky hands, he flicked a lighter and threw it into the puddle of gasoline. The fire erupted instantly. The house wailed. Shadows fluttered across the walls, the eerie figures of burned men reaching out to him, but the fire devoured them. The floor beneath Artyom began to slump. "You shouldn't have woken us up," howled someone's voice. Bloody ash sprinkled from the ceiling. Artyom gathered all his strength and, jumping over the beams engulfed in flames, rushed to the front door. This time it yielded. He burst outside into the cold night, stumbling, panting. Behind him, the house was cracking, collapsing, emitting screams from the depths of hell. At the last moment, Artyom saw the faces of the dead in the fire, and among them his own. But was it the end? When the firefighters arrived at the scene, there was nothing left on the spot where the house had stood. No ashes, no debris. It was as if it had never existed. And a month later, in another town, another man was sold a new house, for too good a price. Artyom left town. He tried to forget Belogorsk, the cursed house, the bones under the floor and the eyes staring out of the darkness. But the horror never left him. Every night he dreamed of that house, but not burned down, but whole, alive, calling him back. He saw shadows in the windows, heard whispers from the walls. Sometimes he woke up with the sensation of someone standing beside his bed. But he was sure he had escaped. It's all behind him. Until one day he received a letter. The envelope was old, yellowed, no return address. There was only one word written on it: return. His hands trembled. He slowly tore open the envelope and pulled out a piece of paper. On it was a drawing. A house. Only now it looked new, restored. And underneath the drawing, 3 words: "He's waiting for you." That same day, in another city, a man named Victor bought a house at a bargain price. "It's just an old homestead," the realtor said, smiling. Victor walked into the house. Everything looked perfect, except that the floors were too hard. It was as if something had been hidden underneath. And in the night, Victor woke up to a knocking on the wall. Knock, knock, knock. He froze. A whisper. "You built a house on bones, and now you're with us." Victor awoke in the middle of the night to a thud. Knock, knock, knock. The sound came from a wall at the headboard of the bed. He sat up abruptly, his heart pounding frantically. "Just the wind," he muttered, trying to calm himself. But the wind can't beat. Knock, knock, knock. Again, louder. Something wanted to come out. The next day, Victor decided to look around the house. In the basement, he found an old wooden door hidden behind a closet. It was nailed shut. Someone had scratched crooked symbols into the wood. Sealed, "Do not open." But Victor didn't believe in prejudice. He took a shovel and, without thinking, kicked open the door. The smell of damp and rot hit him in the face. Behind the door was a narrow passage down, and at the end stood a chest. Victor bent down and carefully opened the lid. Inside were bones, but this was no ordinary skeleton. The bones were bound with rusty chains, and there was a rusty nail sticking out of the skull. A yellowed note lay next to it. "You can't let him get out. Close the door before it's too late." At that moment, something stirred in the darkness. Through the whispers and the heavy creaking of bones, he heard a terrifying gasp. The creature awoke. They returned. The candle flame in the basement trembled. The shadows on the walls began to move. Victor felt something cold touch his back. Slowly, he turned around. Behind his back stood a creature covered in rotting skin. Its mouth was torn open in an inhuman grin. "You woke us up," it wheezed. Behind it, others were rising. Those who were buried in this house. Those who were waiting for a new master. Victor screamed, but the walls had already begun to shrink, absorbing his screams. The house had its new victim, but it would never be satiated. Victor screamed, but the walls were already shrinking around him, shadows sliding across the floor, stretching out bony arms. The creature with the tattered grin approached, its eyes empty but full of hunger. "You are new flesh for the house." Victor dashed as hard as he could toward the exit, leaping over the remains, but there was no more passage. The house would not let him out. Shadows braided his legs and cold fingers gripped his neck. "You must become part of us." Victor realized it was useless to resist, but in a last desperate move, he grabbed a rusty nail from the chest and drove it into the creature's skull. There was a terrifying screech. The creature staggered, its body crumbling to dust. At that moment, the walls of the house shook. Victor realized he had a chance. He rushed up the stairs, smashing everything in his path. He reached the front door. He pushed as hard as he could, and it opened. He tumbled outside, falling into the dirt, panting. When he looked back, the house was gone. Just black earth strewn with human bones. But he would return. A few months later, a new house was built on the same spot. The locals said that a young family would now live here. The realtor smiled at the new owner. "You're in luck. It's a beautiful home, and at a very favorable price." The owner nodded as he looked at his new home. But within its walls, a familiar knocking sound was already beginning to be heard. Knock, knock, knock.